Hey everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive. You know, we love to dig into interesting stuff, and today we're diving into the world of conversational English.
Casual conversation can be so tricky to learn.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's like there's this hidden code everyone knows, but no one teaches you.
Exactly.
So we've got these real conversations from an English learning YouTube channel,
Perfect.
and we're gonna dissect them and pull out the good stuff, see what we can learn.
I love that. Unscripted exchanges are like gold mines for language learners.
Totally. Okay, so right off the bat, I noticed those little rituals we do when we meet someone new.
Oh, yeah.
Where are you from? What do you do? Classics.
Like a universal script for introductions.
But then there was, how old are you? And is that okay to ask?
Ooh, good point. It really depends on the culture, right? In some places, it's totally normal. But in others, it could be seen as rude or too personal.
Makes sense. Okay, so then usually after introductions, people start talking about their families, right?
Absolutely. It's a natural way to connect and learn more about someone's background.
And it seems like a good way to practice vocabulary for family members and relationships.
Totally. Plus, we heard some cool examples of how to talk about jobs in the past tense, like she's a manager versus he used to be a teacher.
Right. It's like a little grammar lesson tucked into a casual chat.
Exactly.
Now, one thing that really stood out to me was how conversations about favorite things revealed some interesting differences.
Oh, for sure. It's fascinating how people's preferences can be so different, even if they speak the same language.
Yeah, like the whole thick versus thin pizza crust debate.
I know, right? Who knew pizza could be so controversial?
Seriously. And then there was this disagreement about winter, with one person loving snow and the other hating the cold.
It shows how our individual experiences shape our preferences.
Definitely. But it was cool how they still respected each other's opinions, even though they disagreed.
Yeah, they used phrases like while, on the other hand, and even though to acknowledge each other's views.
It's like a masterclass in disagreeing politely.
Totally. A valuable skill in any language.
Okay, now let's talk about weekends. I love how these conversations gave us a peek into their lifestyle.
Me too. It's fascinating how people spend their free time.
One person talked about making these elaborate breakfasts, while another focused on cleaning and catching up with friends.
Such different approaches to the weekend.
I know. And we heard so many verbs related to leisure activities, cleaning, playing soccer, hiking, going to festivals. It's like a vocabulary buffet for weekend fun.
You got that right. And they didn't just list activities, they used time markers like first, after that, and on Sunday.
Right, like little signposts to guide us through their day.
Exactly. Those time markers are crucial for storytelling and helping the listener follow along.
Okay, this next part I thought was so cool. We learned about the speakers' different language abilities and how they learned new languages.
Oh yeah, that was inspiring. They spoke English, Yoruba, French, Japanese. Oh.
Such a diverse group. And remember that funny discussion about English and French words that are spelled the same but pronounced differently?
Like impossible. Oh yeah, that was classic.
Yeah, it highlights those tricky little pronunciation differences that can trip you up.
For sure. But it's also a reminder that humor can be a great tool for language learning.
It makes those awkward moments a little less awkward.
Totally.
Okay, now let's travel to some new places. They talked about life in San Francisco and Chicago.
I love those conversations. They were like virtual postcards.
They really were. They used adjectives like expensive, beautiful, dangerous, and interesting to paint these vivid pictures.
And they didn't just say expensive. They said more expensive or the most expensive, using those comparative and superlative forms.
Right. And those specific details, like San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge and Chicago's location by Lake Michigan, really brought the cities to life.
Absolutely. Specifics make a story or description so much more engaging and memorable.
Okay, last but not least, let's peek into their daily routines.
I'm always curious about how people structure their days.
Me too. And they used a ton of time expressions in the morning, around noon, after that, at night. It's like learning the rhythm of life in English.
Precisely. Those time expressions are key for understanding the flow of events and making sense of time in a new language.
And they didn't just tell us what they did, they walked us through their whole day, waking up, breakfast, work, exercise, watching TV, going to bed, the whole shebang.
It's amazing how much detail they packed into those conversations.
I know. And it wasn't just about the vocabulary. We also got these little glimpses into their cultures.
Oh, absolutely. Like when someone mentioned going to church every Sunday morning.
Right. Or someone else talked about having a lie-in on weekends, which is a British expression for sleeping in.
It's those subtle cultural insights that make language learning so fascinating.
Totally. It's incredible how much we've learned just by listening to these everyday chats.
I know, right? It's like we've been eavesdropping on real life.
And it's not just about learning English, it's about understanding how people communicate and connect with each other.
Absolutely.
It's about those little moments of shared humanity that transcend language and culture.
Beautifully said. We're back and ready to keep digging into those conversational gems.
I was thinking about how they used colors, not just to name them, but to describe things.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, like when they said the ocean or the sky was blue.
Exactly. It's such a basic thing, but it helps build vocabulary, and it shows how colors can evoke emotions and paint pictures in your mind.
Right. And it wasn't just simple colors either. They talked about warm versus cool colors and how those preferences relate to personality and style.
Totally. Which made me realize how colors can be subjective. Like red can mean luck in some cultures, but danger in others.
That's such a good point.
Hmm.
It reminds us that even something as seemingly universal as color has cultural layers.
Okay, so speaking of cultural layers, I loved how they talked about their hometowns. It was like taking a mini vacation.
I know, right? They were so descriptive, using words like beautiful, clean, dangerous, expensive to paint these vivid pictures.
And they didn't just list adjectives, they used those comparative and superlative forms. More expensive, less dangerous, the most interesting. It's like a grammar lesson in action.
Exactly. Those comparisons really highlight the similarities and differences between places.
And I loved those little details they threw in, like San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge or Chicago being by Lake Michigan.
It's like those specifics are what make a place come alive in your imagination.
Totally. Okay, remember that game they played where they described famous people and had to guess who it was?
Oh yeah, that was fun.
It was like a linguistic puzzle.
And such a clever way to practice descriptive language.
Yeah.
They talked about nationality, profession, age, appearance, all without saying the person's name.
Right. And it was cool how they used adjectives and adverbs to give those extra details. Young, famous, good at sports, funny, fast.
It's like those details help narrow down the possibilities and make the game more challenging.
Speaking of challenges, let's talk about time. Not like the abstract concept of time, but how they organize their days and routines.
Time management is such a universal struggle.
It really is. And it was fascinating to see how they used time expressions, like in the morning, around noon, after that, at night. It's like learning the rhythm of life in English.
That's a great way to put it. Those time markers help us understand the sequence of events and make sense of time in a new language.
Plus, they gave us so much detail. They walked us through their whole day, step by step. It's like we got to live a day in their shoes.
I know. And it wasn't just about listing activities. Their routines also reviewed some interesting cultural differences.
Oh, yeah, like when someone mentioned having a lie-in on weekends.
That's a classic British expression.
It shows how even simple conversations can be full of these little cultural nuggets.
So true. Okay, ready to get a bit more personal. Because they also opened up about their families.
Oh, I love those conversations. They talked about their parents, siblings, best friends. It was so heartwarming.
It's fascinating to see how people maintain those close relationships and how they communicate with their loved ones.
Right. They talked about calling, writing, visiting, sharing experiences. It's like those themes of family and friendship are universal.
Definitely. And with technology, it's so much easier to stay connected, even across long distances.
Totally. They talked about using Skype, Facebook, messaging, phone calls. It's like a whole new vocabulary for modern relationships.
It is. And remember that story about someone's dad getting a little upset if they didn't call often enough?
Oh, that was hilarious. It's like even in casual conversation, those little personality quirks come out. Okay, now let's go shopping. They had some fun conversations about clothes, prices, even online shopping.
Shopping is definitely a universal activity.
Right, and we got to hear all this vocabulary related to clothing, colors, sizes, prices. It's like a fashion dictionary.
It was. And beyond just listing items, they talked about their personal styles and how fashion can be a way to express yourself.
I loved that contrast between the person who preferred fewer items but high quality versus the person who loved having lots of choices.
It's like our shopping habits can reveal so much about our values and priorities.
And that online shopping conversation was so relatable. They talked about using Amazon, comparing prices, even the struggles of finding the right thing online.
It's a conversation that anyone who's ever shopped online can relate to. And it shows how technology has changed the way we shop.
Totally. But they also touched on some of the downsides of online shopping, like the risk of buying something without trying it on, or the environmental impact.
It's a good reminder that even casual conversations can touch on some pretty complex issues.
It's true. I'm amazed by how much ground we've covered just by listening to these seemingly simple chats.
It just goes to show how rich and complex everyday language can be. All right, ready to dive back in.
Oh, absolutely. One thing that always fascinates me is how different cultures celebrate holidays. And we actually got to hear the speakers talk about some American holidays.
Oh, that's right. It was like a little window into American culture. They talked about New Year's Day, Valentine's Day, Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, the whole shebang.
It was interesting to hear about the traditions and like the food associated with each holiday. And it made me realize how much I take for granted about my own culture's
It's
celebrations.
easy to do, right? But hearing about those traditions from an outsider's perspective can give
Yeah.
you a whole new appreciation for them.
Totally. Oh, and they even talked about Cinco de Mayo, which I thought was interesting because it's actually celebrated more in the U.S. than in Mexico.
That's right. It just shows how cultural traditions can evolve and take on new meanings in different contexts.
Speaking of cultural exchange, I loved how they talked about their experiences learning new languages. They shared some pretty funny stories about like pronunciation mishaps and grammar struggles.
Those stories are always so relatable. I mean, who hasn't felt that moment of panic when you realize you've completely messed up a word or a phrase?
Oh, totally. It's like a universal language learner experience. But it was inspiring to hear how they persevered and like used humor to get through those awkward moments.
Exactly. It reminds us that language learning is a journey, not a destination. And it's okay to make mistakes along the way. In fact, those mistakes can be some of the best learning opportunities.
So true. Okay, let's switch gears for a minute and talk about education. We heard the speakers share some insights about their experiences as teachers and coaches.
Oh yeah, they had some interesting perspectives on teaching styles, the dynamics between teachers and students, and the challenges and rewards of the profession.
It was fascinating to hear how passionate they were about their work, even though they acknowledged the long hours and demanding students.
Right. It shows that teaching is more than just a job. It's a calling. It takes a special kind of person to dedicate themselves to educating others.
And it was cool to hear them talk about extracurricular activities and the importance of giving students opportunities to explore their interests outside of the classroom.
Totally. It's like those activities help round out a student's education and give them a chance to discover their passions.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I'm just struck by how much we've learned from listening to these everyday conversations. It's like we've been on this amazing journey through language and culture.
It really is incredible. We've explored personal introductions, family dynamics, colors, cities, shopping habits, holidays, education. The list goes on.
Yeah.
And it's all through these seemingly simple chats.
Exactly. It just shows how much richness and depth there is in everyday language. And it reminds us that language is more than just words and grammar. It's a way to connect with others, share experiences, and understand different perspectives.
Beautifully said. I think that's a perfect note to end on.
I agree. So to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep embracing the beauty of language. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.